Today, I'm going to tell you a story so shocking that it divided a whole frontier town, right in the heart of the Wild West, a place where rumors traveled faster than bullets and where judgment often came before truth. This was a land where a man could lose everything not for what he had done, but for who he dared to love. And it all began with one small moment, a moment no one was supposed to see, yet one that changed countless lives forever. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Arizona Territory, 1878. A pale curtain of dust rolled in from the eastern horizon, drifting slowly beneath the late-day sun until the sky itself seemed dipped in gold. Thaddeus Whitcomb narrowed his eyes against the glare, lifting one calloused hand to shield his vision as he studied the lone rider approaching his land. Behind him, the newly built two-story ranch house stood proud and clean, white clapboard shining sharply against the red earth and distant mountain ridges, a symbol of everything he had fought to build. "Pa, who's that?" Elara Whitcomb stepped onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron. At 22, she carried a quiet resilience that mirrored her father's, though her face still held the gentle grace of her late mother, Eleanor Whitcomb. "Hard to say," Thaddeus answered. His voice was rough from decades of shouting commands across open range, but he rides steady, not the way drifters do. As the figure drew closer, Thaddeus's shoulders tightened. The rider sat upright on a paint horse, moving with calm discipline despite the blistering heat. Long black hair was tied behind his neck with a strip of worn leather. Copper-toned skin marked him clearly as native. "An Apache," Thaddeus muttered beneath his breath. His hand drifted instinctively toward the rifle resting near the door, a habit forged in harsher years, even now when treaties were signed and men claimed the fighting was finished. The rider slowed before reaching the house, stopping at a respectful distance. Up close, his features were strong and defined, his expression composed, his dark eyes carrying a depth that made him seem older than his years, though Thaddeus judged him to be around 30. "My name is Zayern," the man said calmly, his English flawless and unbroken. "I've come looking for work." Thaddeus lifted a brow. "Work?" "I break horses, drive cattle, mend fences." Each word came steady, without boasting. "I worked 2 seasons for John Mackenzie at Crescent Valley Ranch, 1 year with the Hendersons outside Tucson." From the porch, Elara watched in silence, strangely drawn to him. Unlike most settlers raised on fear of Apache raids, she felt no immediate dread, only curiosity. She had spent years in Boston before her mother's death brought her back west, and though she knew the stories, her mind had not hardened the way others had. Thaddeus's doubt showed plainly on his face. "And why would Mackenzie hire an Apache?" "Because no one else could break his stallion," Zayern replied simply. He reached into a small pouch at his belt and unfolded a letter, extending it forward. "Those are his words, not mine." Thaddeus hesitated, then accepted it. As his eyes moved across the page, his expression slowly shifted, suspicion giving way to surprise. "Says here you handle animals like nothing he's ever seen," Thaddeus said quietly. "Claims you saved his entire herd during last year's drought." Zayern offered neither pride nor denial. He only waited, the still patience of a man long used to being weighed by others. Thaddeus Whitcomb was no fool. Skilled help was rare these days. Most men chased rumors of gold or silver, leaving ranches understaffed. His operation was growing faster than the 3 dry mesa hands he employed could manage. "I'll give you a week," he said at last. "You bunk with the hands. First sign of trouble, you're gone." "Fair terms," Zayern replied with a single nod. Elara watched as her father led him toward the bunkhouse. Something stirred within her, an interest she hadn't felt since returning from the east. There was a calm about him, a dignity that refused to bow, no matter how often the world likely tried to bend it. That evening at supper, the dry mesa hands ate quickly, voices low, glancing now and then toward the bunkhouse where Zairn took his meal alone. "You sure about this, Mr. Whitcomb?" Brack Morvan asked. The older ranch hand had worked the land since before Ilara was born. "Apache ain't like other Indians." "He came with references," Thaddeus cut in, "and we need the help with new horses coming in next week. That's the end of it." Ilara said nothing, though her thoughts lingered on the stranger, and what it must take to seek work among people who had driven his kind from their own land. What sort of courage did that demand? What desperation? Morning broke with streaks of crimson and gold across the sky. Ilara rose early as always, helping prepare breakfast before the day's labor began. Through the kitchen window, she noticed movement near the corral, where their most dangerous animal was kept. The black stallion, a magnificent brute that had thrown every man who tried to ride him. She stepped onto the porch with her coffee mug and froze. Zairn stood alone inside the corral. No rope, no bridle. The stallion circled him at a tense trot, muscles coiled, nostrils flaring. Yet something unseen connected them. Zairn's lips moved in quiet speech, though she couldn't hear the words. His hands remained open at his sides. The horse snorted, tossed its head, slowed. Time stretched thin. Then, impossibly, the stallion stepped forward, lowered its proud head, and allowed Zairn to place a hand against its muzzle. "Sweet heaven," Ilara whispered. "I've never seen anything like that," her father said behind her. Thaddeus had risen early as well, and stood staring in open disbelief. "That horse nearly killed Brack last month." In the days that followed, the pattern continued. Zairn worked from first light until well after dusk, taking on the harshest tasks without complaint. Steady, silent, unyielding. And the ranch began to change. The animals responded to Zairn as though he spoke a language older than words, one understood only by creatures that had never truly been tamed. Even the ranch dogs, usually wary of anyone new, began trailing behind him, tails wagging, accepting him without hesitation. At first, the dry mesa hands kept their distance, eating apart and speaking to him only when duty required it. Yet as days turned into weeks, even the most hardened among them could no longer deny how deeply his presence strengthened the ranch. Ilara Whitcomb soon found herself inventing small errands that carried her closer to wherever he worked. She brought water out to the fields, lingered near the new fencing as it took shape, gathered eggs from the henhouse when Zairn happened to be nearby repairing posts. With every passing encounter, her curiosity deepened, drawn to the quiet steadiness he carried, a strength that never demanded attention, yet commanded it all the same. One evening, as the sun sank low and set the western sky ablaze in crimson and copper, Ilara discovered him seated alone beside the creek that traced the eastern boundary of the land. He sat on a fallen cottonwood log, the world hushed around him. In his hands rested a small block of wood. His knife moved with smooth, deliberate strokes, the same calm precision he brought to every task. Ilara paused at the edge of the clearing. She knew well the rules that governed a woman's conduct. Unmarried ladies did not seek the company of men, least of all those born of a different world. Still, something about his solitude pulled at her. "May I sit with you?" she asked quietly, stepping forward. Zairn looked up, brief surprise flickering across his composed face. After a moment, he inclined his head and shifted slightly along the log, offering her space. Ilara sat beside him, carefully smoothing her skirts beneath her hands. For several minutes, neither spoke. They watched as daylight faded, and the first stars pierced the deepening sky. "What are you carving?" she asked at last, nodding toward his hands. Zairn lifted the piece. The shape of a horse was forming, lean, powerful, caught in motion even within unfinished lines. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "Beauty is everywhere," he replied, his voice low and calm against the evening chorus of insects. "Most people have forgotten how to see it." "I haven't," Alara said softly. Their eyes met before she looked away. "When I was away at school, I missed this land more than I expected. The quiet that isn't truly empty. The silence that still speaks, if you listen." Zairn studied her with new interest. "You understand," he said. "Many of your people never do. My mother taught me to look past what the eye is told to see." Alara smiled faintly. "Before she passed, my mother, Eleanor Whitcomb, used to take me riding at dawn, just to watch how the light moved across the mountains." They fell silent again, yet it was not awkward. It was the kind of stillness shared by two souls recognizing something familiar in one another, despite the distance between their lives. After a time, Alara spoke again. "Why did you come here?" She hesitated, struggling to shape the truth. "To work among those who took our land," Zairn finished gently, without bitterness. "The world is changing, Alara Whitcomb," he continued. "My people can change with it, or vanish beneath it. I chose to keep walking forward, even if that path led me here." He glanced toward the ranch. "Your father is an honest man. He measures worth by actions, not blood. That is uncommon." His knife resumed its steady rhythm. "And valuable." A distant call broke the moment, Thaddeus Whitcomb's voice carrying from the house. "I should go," Alara said reluctantly, rising to her feet. "Thank you for sharing your evening with me." Zairn nodded, his gaze lingering on hers a moment longer than propriety allowed. As she turned away, he spoke again. "This is for you." He held out the small carving, nearly finished now. "For someone who still sees beauty." Alara hesitated. She knew such gifts blurred lines that ought to remain firm, yet her hand moved before caution could stop it. Her fingers brushed his as she accepted the wooden horse. "Thank you," she whispered. She hurried back toward the house, clutching the carving against her chest, like a charm meant to guard the heart. Neither of them noticed Brack Morven standing beneath the shadow of a cottonwood tree nearby, his weathered expression darkening as he watched the exchange. Summer gave way to autumn, nights cooled. The promise of winter settled into the air. Under Thaddeus Whitcomb's careful leadership, the ranch flourished, and Zairn's contribution proved greater than anyone could have foreseen. Horses were broken in record time. New stock thrived. The cattle fattened on grazing land Zairn had identified, land others had dismissed as too thin to sustain life. Alara found herself increasingly drawn into conversation with him. Their interactions remained proper, almost always within view of others, yet with time they deepened. Trust took root quietly, growing stronger with each shared word. She learned he was the son of a chief, educated for a time by missionaries before returning to his people. He spoke 3 languages with ease and read the stars as naturally as she read books. 5 years earlier, disease had taken his wife, Saya, and their infant son, Iko, a loss that drove him away from the reservations where illness spread unchecked. In return, Alara shared memories of her mother, her schooling in Boston, and her love for the raw beauty of the territory so many Easterners dismissed as savage. Zairn listened with an attentiveness she had never known, as if every word she offered carried weight. From the porch, Thaddeus Whitcomb observed their growing bond with unease. He understood his daughter's loneliness since returning from the East, where companionship had been easy to find. Here, suitable company was scarce. He could not deny Zairn's character. His labor was tireless, his integrity beyond question. Yet Thaddeus also knew the truth of the world they lived in. Apache and white did not mix. Not in marriage, not in the eyes of the Black Ridge folk whose approval shaped livelihoods and futures alike. One evening, as father and daughter sat on the porch after supper, Thaddeus spoke carefully. "Elara," he said, staring out into the darkening land. "I've been thinking it may be time for you to visit Tucson. The Rowicks have invited you to stay with them through the harvest season." Elara Whitcomb lifted her head from her embroidery, the needle pausing mid-stitch. "The Rowicks?" she asked. "Why would I leave now? We have more work here than ever before winter sets in." Thaddeus Whitcomb cleared his throat. "Horace Rowick's son, Alden, has returned from law school in St. Louis. He's joined his father's practice. A respectable young man, strong prospects." Understanding settled slowly across Elara's face. "So this is about finding me a husband. It's about your future," Thaddeus said gently. "You're educated, well-raised. You deserve a life that reflects that." "And if I'm content with the life I have here?" she asked quietly. Thaddeus sighed and set his pipe aside. "Elara, I've noticed the way you look at him." Color rose to her cheeks, but she did not look away. "I don't know what you mean." "The Apache," he said carefully. "Zairn, he's a capable hand. I respect his skill." She nodded quickly. "That's all it is. He teaches me about the land, the plants, the animals, things I never learned back east." "There are lines in this world," Thaddeus said softly. "Lines that cannot be crossed without consequences that would ruin you both." Her fingers trembled as she returned to her stitching. "We're only friends." "See that it stays so," he replied. "Not for my sake, for yours." "The territory isn't ready for such things," he nearly said, but left the words unspoken. Elara fell silent, her gaze fixed on the fabric, though her thoughts drifted far away. She remembered the warmth in Zairn's eyes as he explained which roots eased fever, the gentleness of his guidance when he showed her how to calm a nervous foal. Just friendship, she told herself. Her heart knew otherwise. The following day arrived beneath heavy clouds, thick with the promise of the season's first true rain. The dry mesa hands rushed to finish outdoor work before the storm broke. Returning from the henhouse with a basket of eggs, Elara spotted Zairn leading the black stallion toward the barn, the once violent horse now walking with cautious obedience. Thunder cracked overhead. The stallion reared suddenly, panic surging through its powerful frame. Zairn tightened his hold on the lead rope, speaking low and steady, his voice meant only for the animal. From the far side of the yard, Jory Maddox approached carrying a saddle. The scent of leather sent the stallion into fresh alarm. Its nostrils flared, its muscles tensed. Zairn raised one hand sharply, signaling him back. "Stay there," he called. "He's frightened. Give him space." "I can help," Jory shouted back, eager to prove himself. "We'll get him inside." "No," Zairn said firmly. "Not yet." But like many young men of the frontier, Jory mistook caution for fear. He stepped closer. The stallion exploded upward, hooves striking the air. Elara screamed as Jory slipped and fell beneath the thrashing animal. Without hesitation, Zairn lunged forward, placing himself between the panicked horse and the fallen man. He kept his grip on the rope even as a hoof slammed into his shoulder with a brutal crack. He staggered, but did not fall. Pain flashed across his face, yet his voice never broke as he spoke to the horse in a quiet blend of English and Apache, steady as breath itself. Slowly, impossibly, the animal calmed. By the time Thaddeus Whitcomb and the others reached the scene, Zairn had the stallion under control and was helping Jory back to his feet. "Are you hurt?" Thaddeus demanded. Jory shook his head, brushing dust from his shirt. "No, sir. If it weren't for him." He nodded toward Zairn, respect plain in his eyes. Thaddeus turned. "And you?" Zairn stood stiffly, his left arm pressed tight against his side. "It's nothing," he said, though the tension around his eyes betrayed the lie. "Ilara," Thaddeus called. "Take him inside. See to that shoulder." Then, turning sharply, "Brack, get that horse settled. Afterward, help Jory finish the chores." Ilara guided Zairn toward the house, keenly aware of how improper it might seem, and equally aware of her father's command. Inside the kitchen, she motioned him to the heavy wooden table. "You'll need to remove your shirt," she said, gathering clean cloth, bandages, and the bottle of whiskey kept for medicine. Her voice was steady, practiced. When he did not move at once, she looked up. Zairn was watching her, his expression unreadable. "Your shoulder," she said gently. "I need to see it." Slowly, he unbuttoned his work shirt, wincing as the fabric slid free of the injured side. Ilara drew in a sharp breath, not from impropriety, but from what she saw. Scars crossed his copper skin, some deep and old, others bearing the markings of ceremony and survival. Stories written without words. The newest injury had already darkened into a spreading bruise, the skin split where the hoof had struck. "This will sting," she warned, soaking a cloth with whiskey. Zairn did not flinch as she cleaned the wound. His eyes never left her face. The stillness of the kitchen, the closeness between them, the storm rumbling beyond the walls, all of it formed a tension neither dared to name. "Why did you do it?" Ilara asked quietly. "You put yourself in danger for Jory," Ilara said quietly, as she wrapped clean linen around his shoulder. "He's shown you nothing but distance since the day he arrived." Zairn's voice remained calm. "A man's worth is not proven by how he treats those who welcome him," he said, "but by how he treats those who have offered him no kindness." Ilara's hands stilled against his skin. "Is that an Apache teaching?" she asked. A faint smile touched his mouth. "No, that one belongs to me." Their eyes met and held. The space between them seemed to tighten, charged with words neither dared speak aloud. Ilara became painfully aware of the warmth beneath her palms, of the steady rise and fall of his breath, of how near they stood within the quiet kitchen. "Zairn," she whispered, unsure of what she meant to say next. The door opened abruptly. Thaddeus Whitcomb entered, Brack Morven close behind him. Both men halted at the sight before them, Ilara standing far too close to the half-dressed Apache, her hands lingering at his bandaged shoulder. "I've finished," Ilara said at once, stepping back and collecting the cloths. "The wound isn't deep, but the bruising will be bad." Thaddeus's expression remained carefully neutral, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "Thank you, Ilara." Then to Zairn. "You're excused from heavy labor until that shoulder mends. You'll assist with accounts and supply records instead." "That's women's work," Brack muttered, his gaze sharp as it moved between them. "It's work that must be done," Thaddeus replied firmly, "and Zairn's education makes him better suited to figures than most men here." He turned to his daughter. "You'll show him the ledgers in the morning." That night, Ilara lay awake, listening to rain drum against the roof. Her thoughts refused to settle. The memory of Zairn's skin beneath her fingers, the depth in his dark eyes when they met hers, the strange sense of rightness she'd felt standing so close. All of it both frightened and thrilled her. She was not naive. She understood what her father had tried to warn her of on the porch. A proper white woman did not allow her heart to wander toward an Apache, no matter how honorable he might be. Such bonds existed on the frontier, yes, but only in whispers and shadows, often ending in shame for the women who dared them. Yet something inside her resisted those unspoken laws. What she felt for Zaire reached beyond simple attraction, though that too was undeniable. In him she recognized a spirit much like her own, one that sought truth, honored silence, and found wonder in the world rather than fear. As autumn deepened, Zaire's shoulder healed, yet Thaddeus continued assigning him to work alongside Ilara with the ranch correspondence and accounts. Whether it was a test of propriety or merely a practical decision remained unclear. What was certain was that it granted them daily moments together, moments that quietly strengthened what lay between them. They spoke of books and landscapes, of the rhythm of seasons and the mysteries written in the stars. Zaire taught her words from his language, smiling softly at her attempts to shape the unfamiliar sounds. In return, Ilara shared her mother's poetry volumes, watching his expression as he absorbed the cadence of Wordsworth and Keats. One crisp afternoon in November, the account books lay forgotten on the desk. Ilara found herself speaking of her mother's final days. "She loved this land fiercely," Ilara said, gazing toward the distant mountains beyond the study window. Even when illness stole her strength, she asked to be carried to the porch just to watch the sunset. She swallowed. Her last words were about finding beauty where others fail to look. When she turned, Zaire was watching her with an intensity that made her breath falter. "I think she would have understood," Ilara added quietly. "Understood what?" he asked when she fell silent. Ilara drew a steady breath. "How I've come to feel about you." The words hovered between them, impossible to take back. Zaire did not move. Only his eyes betrayed the storm within him. "Ilara," he said at last, her name spoken like a prayer. "What I feel for you." He shook his head slowly. "It cannot be. Because you are Apache, and I am white?" The defiance in her voice surprised even herself. "Because I would bring you pain," he answered simply. "Loving me would give you nothing but suffering in this world." "Shouldn't that be my choice?" she whispered. Zaire rose and stepped toward her. With infinite care, he lifted his hand and brushed her cheek, barely a touch, yet it sent warmth racing through her. It was the first time he had touched her beyond necessity. "Some choices carry consequences far greater than the heart can foresee," he said gently. Footsteps approached in the hallway. They stepped apart at once. When Thaddeus entered the study, they sat properly on opposite sides of the desk, ledger books opened between them. Everything appeared unchanged. Yet something irreversible had occurred. A boundary had been crossed. A truth spoken that could never be undone. The winter of 1878 descended upon Arizona territory with uncommon cruelty. Snow covered the desert in silent white, broken only by the dark outlines of fences and buildings. Cattle sheltered in ravines, surviving on hay stored in careful preparation. Despite the bitter conditions, the Whitcomb Ranch endured. Thaddeus's foresight, combined with Zaire's deep knowledge of survival in harsh land, preserved their herds while neighboring ranches suffered heavy loss. The forced stillness of winter. The closeness of winter reshaped daily life at the ranch. With snow hemming them in, days passed mostly indoors, and evenings were spent gathered near the fireplace. A quiet domestic rhythm took hold. Zaire, now firmly established as Thaddeus Whitcomb's most trusted man, no longer ate his suppers in the bunkhouse. Instead, he joined the family at the main table. His calm intelligence and unwavering integrity had earned Thaddeus's sincere respect, though not his blessing for the feelings slowly growing between Zaire and Ilara. Those emotions, never spoken again after the moment in the study, revealed themselves in subtler ways, fingertips brushing when passing account books, glances exchanged across candlelight, conversations that lingered long after Thaddeus had retired for the night. They were careful, always proper, always mindful of lines they dared not cross. Yet their hearts had already chosen what their minds insisted could never be. By late February, winter began to loosen its grip. Snow receded from the fields, and with the thaw came visitors, the first the ranch had seen since before Christmas. Horace Rowick arrived one afternoon with his son, Alden. Officially, the visit concerned business matters. Unofficially, the presence of Alden's sister, Maeva Rowick, made their intentions unmistakable. Ilara welcomed them with practiced courtesy, painfully aware of her father's transparent hopes. Alden Rowick was handsome in the conventional sense, well-groomed, confident, his law training evident in every measured word. He directed most of his attention toward Ilara, praising her appearance and questioning her at length about her years in Boston. Zaire attended the business discussions as part of the ranch's management. His expression remained unreadable, giving nothing away. Only Ilara, who had learned the language of his silences, noticed the quiet ache shadowing his eyes. That evening, a small dinner gathering was arranged. Maeva played the piano softly in the parlor while Alden engaged Ilara in conversation about literature and art. Thaddeus and Horace debated territorial politics and the future promise of statehood. Zaire spoke little. When addressed, he answered respectfully, but a subtle withdrawal edged his usual dignity, something only Ilara perceived. As the evening stretched on, Alden grew more forward, seating himself beside her on the narrow sofa. "You must find life here terribly isolating," he said kindly. "A woman of your refinement deserves the stimulation of proper society." "I find no shortage of purpose," Ilara replied, her gaze briefly drifting across the room to Zaire before returning to him. "This land teaches lessons no classroom ever could." Alden followed her glance, his expression cooling. "Yes, I suppose living among such varied elements has a certain anthropological interest." His voice lowered further. "Though I must admit, my father was quite surprised to see an Apache dining at your table. Is that common here?" The condescension in his tone ignited anger in Ilara's chest. "Zaire is my father's most trusted advisor," she said firmly. "His intelligence and character have earned him respect in this household." Alden lifted an eyebrow at her intensity. "Of course," he said smoothly. "I meant no offense. It is merely uncommon." Before she could answer, Thaddeus rose from his chair. "Alden," he said evenly, "I understand you became rather skilled at chess during your time in St. Louis. Care for a match?" He turned to his daughter. "Ilara, perhaps you and Maeva would like to continue your conversation." The evening concluded with polite farewells, invitations extended for a spring visit to Tucson, and pointed remarks from both fathers regarding the advantages of alliances between established families in a growing territory. After the Rowicks departed, Thaddeus lingered in the parlor while Ilara extinguished the lamps. "Alden seems quite taken with you," he observed. She continued working in silence. "He would make an excellent match," Thaddeus went on. "Good family, education, prospects that will only improve as this territory develops." "Then I hope he finds the right woman," Ilara said at last, turning to face him. "Because it won't be me." Thaddeus released a heavy breath. "Ilara, I know he may not stir the sort of romantic ideals young women dream of, but practicality." "This isn't about romance," she interrupted, a rare break in her composure. "It's about respect. Did you hear how he spoke of Zaire? As though he were something to be studied rather than a man of honor." And is that all this is? Thaddeus asked gently. Your defense of his dignity? She hesitated beneath his knowing gaze. I care for him, she admitted softly. More than I should. Thaddeus crossed the room and took her hands in his. I know, he said simply. I've seen it growing between you, even while hoping it would not. Are you angry? She asked. Disappointed, he admitted. Yes, concerned, deeply. But angry, she pressed. No. He squeezed her hands gently. You have your mother's heart. Stubborn. And true. But Alara, Thaddeus said quietly, this world shows little mercy to those who challenge its rules, least of all to women who choose men like Zairn, no matter how honorable he may be. So I should marry someone like Alden Rowick instead? Alara replied, her voice tight. A man who looks down on what he doesn't understand? Who measures worth by position instead of character? You must consider what a life beside Zairn would cost you, Thaddeus answered gently. The friendships that would fade, the doors that would close, the children you might bear, belonging fully to neither world. He released her hands. I won't force your decision, he said. You are far too much your mother's daughter for that. But I ask you to think beyond this moment, beyond feelings that burn bright now, yet may demand more than you realize. Alara nodded slowly. She could not deny the truth in his words, yet she could not imagine commanding her heart to follow another path. The next morning dawned clear and strangely warm for the season. Restless from the night before, Alara rose early. She saddled her mare and rode toward the creek, swollen with melting snow, seeking the quiet that only open land could offer. She found Zairn there, as though her thoughts had summoned him. He stood at the water's edge, watching the current rush past with the stillness of a man in prayer. Zairn, she called softly, dismounting and tying her horse to a cottonwood. He turned, unsurprised. I knew you would come, he said. How could you know that? Because your heart speaks to mine. The simplicity of his words struck deeper than any poetry could. She stepped beside him, close enough to feel his warmth, though not touching. For a long moment they stood together, gathering courage for what must be spoken. Alden Rowick will ask for your hand, Zairn said at last. His voice remained steady, though pain flickered in his eyes. Your father will give his blessing. My father does not choose my husband, Alara replied. I do. She lifted her chin. And I have already chosen. Zairn turned fully toward her, studying her with an intensity that reached straight through her defenses. Do you understand what you're saying? He asked quietly. What it would mean? I understand that some things are worth any price, she said. What I feel for you is not something I can abandon for convenience or custom. And what is it you feel? He asked, the question nearly lost beneath the roar of water. Alara stepped closer, closing the careful distance they had maintained for months. I love you, she said simply, with a certainty I have never known before. Zairn closed his eyes briefly, as though struck by something both beautiful and devastating. When he opened them again, joy and sorrow mingled within them. And I love you, he answered. Since the evening you sat beside me on that fallen log and spoke of seeing what others overlook. He lifted his hand and cupped her cheek, his touch light as breath. But loving someone means wanting what is best for them, even when that is not yourself. Don't, Alara whispered, covering his hand with her own, pressing it firmly against her skin. Don't tell me that loving you isn't what's best for me. That isn't yours to decide. No, he said softly. But it is mine to decide whether I can bear watching you lose everything for my sake. Before she could answer, he bent his head and brushed his lips against hers. A whisper of a kiss, gentle yet electric. When he began to pull away, Elara reached for him, her hands sliding to the back of his neck, drawing him back. Their second kiss deepened, months of restraint finally breaking free in shared breath and trembling closeness. Zairn's arms wrapped around her waist, holding her as though the world itself might tear them apart. When they finally separated, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he murmured. "Everything was already changed," she replied. "We've only named it now." The thunder of hoofbeats shattered the moment. They sprang apart as 3 riders emerged from the trees, Brack Morven riding hard at the front, flanked by 2 unfamiliar men. Brack's face twisted with fury. "I knew it," he spat. "I told them what was going on, told them an Apache wouldn't dare unless something improper was happening." The strangers dismounted, hands hovering near their pistols. One wore a badge pinned to his coat. "This the man?" the lawman asked. "That's him," Brack said sharply. "Caught him just like I said." "In the act of what?" Elara demanded, stepping forward despite Zairn's restraining hand. The man ignored her, addressing Zairn directly. "You're wanted for questioning regarding a stage robbery near Tucson last month. Witnesses described an Indian matching your appearance." "That's absurd," Elara protested. "He hasn't left this ranch in months." "With respect, miss, you need to step aside," the deputy replied, his tone suggesting he doubted what he'd interrupted had been innocent at all. "This man is coming with us." Zairn's posture shifted, not in defiance, but in calm acceptance. "I will go," he said evenly. "There has been a misunderstanding." "Zairn, no," Elara began. He silenced her with a look. "Tell your father I've gone to clear a mistake," he said quietly, his eyes carrying a deeper meaning she could not yet read. "Everything will be set right," Elara whispered, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. As the men led Zairn away, she spun toward Brack Morven, her hands trembling, her voice breaking with fury. "You know he's innocent," she shouted. "You know he hasn't left this land even once." Brack's weathered face showed not a flicker of regret. "What I know," he said coldly, "is that no Apache is going to lay hands on a white woman while I'm still breathing." He spat into the dirt. "One day your father will thank me for this." Elara didn't answer. She swung onto her horse and rode hard for the ranch, bursting through the front door where Thaddeus Whitcomb was finishing his morning meal. "They took Zairn," she gasped, breathless, words tumbling as she explained what had happened by the creek. Thaddeus's expression darkened as he listened. "Robbery accusations are serious," he said at last. "But if he's been here the entire time, we can testify to that." "It's a lie," Elara insisted. "Brack arranged it because—" She stopped. "Because he saw something between you and Zairn?" Thaddeus asked gently. Elara nodded, tears gathering. "Father, please, you have to help him." Thaddeus stood, reaching for his coat and hat. "I'll ride to town immediately. If this is about proving where he's been, I can confirm he's worked here without absence." He paused, studying her strained face. "Elara, I need to know exactly what Brack witnessed." She lifted her chin. "He saw us kiss," she admitted quietly. It had only just happened when they arrived. Thaddeus closed his eyes for a moment. "That complicates matters," he said softly. "Once accusations like that begin, they become far more dangerous than any theft charge." "But that isn't fair," Elara cried. "Who has the right to judge who I—" "This isn't about fairness," he interrupted gently. "It's about the world we live in." He took her hands. "I'll do everything I can for Zairn. He's an innocent man, and he's earned my respect. But you must prepare yourself." "Prepare for what?" she whispered. "Even if I secure his release," Thaddeus said quietly, "he cannot return here." The words struck her like a blow. Because of me, she said. Because once such talk begins, it never truly dies, he replied. For his safety, and for yours. He rode for the territorial outpost that very hour. Ilara passed the day in restless torment, moving from room to room, attempting chores she could not focus on. As dusk fell with no sign of her father, she sat rigid beside the parlor window, watching the road, flinching at every sound. When hoofbeats finally approached, she rushed outside, only to find Brack Morven dismounting. "Where is my father?" she demanded. "Still in town," he said, removing his hat. "He sent me back to tell you he'll return tomorrow." Something close to triumph flickered in his eyes, shadowed by something that might have been regret. "The Apache's being held for trial." "On what charge?" Ilara asked tightly. "The robbery won't hold," Brack admitted, "so they changed it." "Changed it to what?" "Improper relations with a white woman." "That isn't a crime," she snapped. "It is for an Indian," Brack replied flatly. "Especially one Apache, with all the blood still between them and the settlers." He stepped closer. "Miss Ilara, I've known you since you were a child. I did this for your own good." "That's vile," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "And don't you dare speak of him that way." She met his gaze without blinking. "Zairn has more honor and decency than any man I've met in this territory, including you." She pointed toward the yard. "Leave this property. You no longer work here." "That ain't your call," Brack protested. "My father left me in charge while he's gone," Ilara replied. "Gather your things. Be gone before morning." She shut the door in his face. Only then did her strength give way. She leaned against the wood as tears finally came, fear and guilt crashing over her as the weight of what she'd set in motion settled heavily upon her heart. Thaddeus returned late the following afternoon, his face drawn with exhaustion. Ilara met him at the door, searching his eyes. "I couldn't secure his release," he said quietly. "The territorial judge arrives next week." Her chest tightened. "So Zairn remains jailed?" "Yes." "And the charges?" she whispered. Thaddeus exhaled heavily. "Officially, they're holding him on suspicion of aiding renegade Apache groups accused of raiding remote homesteads." Then he looked directly at her. "Unofficially, it's about you. Brack's story has spread. The Blackridge folk are furious at the idea of an Apache becoming involved with a white woman." "It was one kiss," Ilara said brokenly. "One moment of honesty after months of denial." Thaddeus nodded. "I believe you." Thaddeus spoke gently, though the weight in his voice could not be hidden. "But that hardly matters now." Ilara swallowed hard. "What will happen to him?" Thaddeus hesitated before answering. "The territorial judge is known to be fair-minded," he said slowly. "If this were only about the false robbery charge or those fabricated claims tying Zairn to raiders, I believe he would be released." He paused, clearly uneasy. But with the personal element involved, his words trailed off. "What personal element?" Ilara pressed. Thaddeus met her gaze. "The judge has authority to order relocation. He could send Zairn to a reservation, possibly one far beyond this territory, if he believes it necessary for public safety or moral order." Ilara's hand flew to her mouth. "They would exile him," she whispered, "because of a kiss. Because of what that kiss represents," Thaddeus corrected sadly. "Fear, change. The idea that the old lines might blur. Places like this resist change with everything they have." "I need to see him," Ilara said suddenly. "I need to tell him I never meant for this to happen." Thaddeus shook his head firmly. "That's impossible. They won't permit it, and trying would only worsen his situation." He placed his hands gently on her shoulders. Elara, listen to me. The only thing you can do now is distance yourself from him, publicly. Her breath caught. You're asking me to deny him, to deny what I feel. I'm asking you to save his life, Thaddeus said quietly, because that is what hangs in the balance. The days leading up to the judge's arrival crawled by like a slow torment. Elara moved through them like a spirit untethered from her body, fulfilling her duties by habit alone, while her thoughts remained locked on Zairn's cell. She wrote letter after letter, confessions, memories, prayers, knowing she had no way to deliver a single one. True to his word, Thaddeus dismissed Brack Morven permanently, despite protests from the dry mesa hands and the hardship of losing a seasoned worker. Each day he rode into town, using every shred of influence he possessed to ensure Zairn was treated humanely and to gather what little information he could about the coming proceedings. On the evening before Judge Ellery Knox was due to arrive, Thaddeus returned with an unexpected visitor, Alden Rowick. Elara greeted him with cool restraint, lacking both the strength and the desire for polite conversation. Mr. Rowick has kindly offered his legal assistance, Thaddeus explained once they were seated in the parlor. As a newly trained attorney, he studied the most recent territorial statutes. Alden leaned forward, his tone measured, though his eyes lingered on Elara longer than necessary. Miss Whitcomb, I understand your concern for your father's employee. While I do not personally approve of fraternization between races, I recognize that false accusations are a matter of justice, not sentiment. Elara bit back a sharp reply, reminding herself that his help might be Zairn's only chance. What can be done? She asked. The claims linking him to renegade Apache raids are weak, Alden said. Your father's testimony placing Zairn continuously on the ranch should dispel those. And the other matter? Thaddeus asked when Alden hesitated. Alden cleared his throat, glancing uneasily toward Elara. That is more delicate. There is no statute explicitly forbidding relations between Indians and whites. However, public morality laws allow broad interpretation. He straightened. If this incident was isolated, perhaps initiated by the Indian, and if Miss Whitcomb were to make a statement distancing herself from any improper sentiment, you want me to say he forced himself on me? Elara cut in sharply. No, Alden said quickly. Only that his attention was unwelcome. That you neither encouraged nor returned such feelings. That what Brack Morven witnessed was misunderstood and will not occur again. Elara rose to her feet. I will not lie, she said firmly. Zairn is the most honorable man I have ever known. What passed between us was mutual and born of truth. Elara, her father began. She turned instead to Alden. I appreciate your willingness to help, Mr. Rowick, but not at the cost of his dignity or my integrity. Alden stood as well, his expression tightening. Miss Whitcomb, you do not seem to grasp the gravity of this situation. Territorial authorities take a harsh view of an Apache man who oversteps his place, especially with a respectable white woman. Without a mitigating statement from you, he continued, your friend faces severe consequences. What consequences? Elara demanded. Alden hesitated, then glanced toward Thaddeus, who nodded grimly. At minimum, Alden said quietly, permanent relocation to a distant reservation. And at worst? There have been instances, Alden admitted, where public outrage ran so high that legal proceedings were bypassed. The implication settled in the room like poison. Elara sank slowly back into her chair. They would lynch him, she whispered, for a kiss. For daring to rise beyond his station, Alden replied, though he had the decency to look ashamed of the words. Thaddeus moved to stand before his daughter. Elara, I know what I'm asking violates everything you believe, but sometimes life offers only terrible choices. She looked from her father to Alden. Then she closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it did not tremble. "Very well," she said. "I will give a statement," Ilara said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "But I will not claim that his actions were improper or unwelcome. I will say only this, that I understand such a relationship cannot exist in this world, and that I have no intention of pursuing it further." Alden Roick nodded after a moment. "That should suffice," he said, "especially with your father's standing supporting your words." Once he departed, Ilara remained alone in her room. Her gaze drifted to the small wooden horse resting on her dresser, the one Zairn had carved for her months earlier. Its smooth lines captured motion and freedom, a thing shaped by loving hands. Only now did she understand the bitter truth. Neither of them had ever truly been free. Not in a land bound by fear, whispered rules, and invisible lines no one dared cross. The territorial judge arrived the next morning, establishing court in the settlement's largest structure, a stark building that served equally as meeting hall and church. Nearly every member of the Blackridge folk gathered, drawn by scandal, curiosity, and the rare spectacle of a public trial. Ilara and Thaddeus arrived early, dressed in their finest attire, not vanity, but armor. Alden met them outside, reviewing final details in hushed tones. "Remember," he said to Ilara, "express regret for any misunderstanding. Emphasize that while you hold no ill will toward the Apache, you recognize the impossibility of any bond beyond employment." She nodded faintly, scarcely hearing him. Her eyes remained fixed on the doorway where Zairn would soon appear. When he was finally brought inside, her breath caught painfully. He walked with the same quiet dignity she had always known, yet confinement had left its mark. His face was thinner. Dark shadows rested beneath his eyes. A fresh bruise marred his jaw, proof that restraint had not meant gentleness, despite Thaddeus's efforts. Still, when his gaze found hers across the crowded hall, there was no anger in it, only sorrow. And concern for her. The proceedings began with formal ritual, yet their outcome felt decided before the first word was spoken. Judge Ellery Knox showed little patience for nuance. The robbery charge was dismissed quickly under Thaddeus's testimony, but the remaining accusations were pressed with alarming weight. Vaughn Ketter emphasized claims of unrest among nearby Apache groups. Brack Morvan testified with dramatic exaggeration, describing the moment at the creek as predatory rather than the tenderness it truly was. Others from the Blackridge folk added rumors and speculation, stories borrowed from fear rather than fact. Throughout it all, Zairn remained silent, following Alden's advice. His stillness was not submission. It was dignity held like a shield, making the accusations seem all the more grotesque. When Ilara was finally called forward, her legs trembled as she rose. The room fell into absolute silence as she stood before the judge. She had practiced her statement repeatedly, words designed to save Zairn by sacrificing herself. But as she faced him now, standing alone before an unjust court, those prepared lines collapsed in her throat. "Miss Whitcomb," Judge Knox said sharply, "describe the nature of your interactions with the defendant." Ilara inhaled deeply. "Zairn came to our ranch seeking honest work," she said. "He performed it with discipline, intelligence, and integrity. Over time, I came to respect his character, his kindness, his restraint, and his honor." Alden stiffened beside her. "As for the incident witnessed by Brack Morvan," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "it was neither forced nor improper. It was a mutual expression of feeling between two people who had come to care deeply for one another." A ripple of murmurs surged through the hall. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Whitcomb, are you stating under oath that you willingly engaged in intimacy with this Apache man?" "I am stating," Ilara replied evenly, "that we shared a single kiss." A hush fell. "A kiss born of respect and affection," she continued, "not the indecency that has been described." The judge's expression hardened. "Young woman, you may not understand the implications of what you are admitting." "I understand perfectly, Your Honor," Ilara said. "I understand that a man stands condemned not for any crime, but for daring to care for someone society has forbidden him to love." A sharp whisper rose behind her. "Ilara," Thaddeus murmured. She turned briefly, meeting her father's pained eyes with quiet apology, then faced the bench again. "I understand I am expected to deny my own heart to satisfy fear," she said. "But if caring for another human being, regardless of blood or color, is a crime in this territory, then perhaps the law itself deserves reconsideration." The courtroom erupted. Judge Knox slammed his gavel repeatedly, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment. Ilara could not tell which. "Order," he barked. "Miss Whitcomb, you will be seated. This court will take a brief recess to consider this unexpected testimony." As Ilara returned to her bench, her eyes found Zairne's. What she saw there shattered her. Pride, love, and a sorrow so deep it felt unbearable. He gave the smallest shake of his head, not in reproach, but in understanding of what her truth would now cost them both. The recess stretched nearly an hour. When Judge Knox returned, his expression was controlled, cold. "Having reviewed all testimony," he announced, "this court finds no sufficient grounds to hold the defendant on charges of robbery or organized insurrection." A breath moved through the hall. "However," he continued, his gaze shifting toward Zairne, "the testimony provided, particularly by Miss Whitcomb, reveals conduct that threatens the moral order and fragile peace of this community." Silence fell again. Heavy. Final. Ilara felt her chest tighten as Judge Ellery Knox continued speaking, his voice echoing through the hushed hall. "Therefore," he declared, "while no formal criminal charges shall be pursued, this court orders the defendant, Zairne of the Chiricahua Apache, to be removed from this district effective immediately. He is to be permanently relocated to the San Carlos Reservation and is hereby forbidden from entering any settlement within this territory without official escort and written authorization." The gavel struck hard against the desk. "Court is adjourned." The room erupted at once, some voices satisfied, others eager with gossip, all buzzing with the thrill of scandal now resolved in their favor. Ilara remained motionless. The weight of what had just occurred, what her truth had cost, pressed down on her until she could barely breathe. "I need to see him," she whispered, turning to her father. "Please, Thaddeus." His face was lined with worry, but after a brief hesitation, he nodded. "Wait here." He crossed the room to Alden Rowick, who was speaking quietly with Vaughn Ketter near the bench. After several tense minutes, Alden approached the judge. Words were exchanged, low, restrained, reluctant. At last, Alden returned. "The judge will allow a brief farewell," he said curtly. "Supervised, before the deputies depart." "It's more than he ought to allow," he added, his tone stiff with disapproval. A deputy escorted Ilara down a narrow corridor into a small antechamber. Zairne stood inside, his wrists bound, another marshal stationed beside the door. 5 minutes, the guard said roughly, "and keep your distance." The door closed. For the first time all day, Ilara's composure broke. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears spilling freely. "This is my fault. All of it." "No," Zairne said quietly. His voice was calm, though emotion shone unmistakably in his eyes. "You spoke truth in a place built on lies. Never apologize for that. But they're sending you away," she said through sobs. "Because of me. Because I couldn't pretend." "They are sending me away because they fear what we represent," he replied gently. "The idea that their borders and divisions might not be permanent." Elara took a step toward him, stopping only when the deputy cleared his throat in warning. "What will happen to you there?" she asked, memorizing every line of his face as if her memory might be all she would ever have. A shadow crossed his features. "The reservation is not kind," he admitted, "but I have survived worse." "I'll come to you," Elara said without thinking. "Once things settle." "No." His voice sharpened, sudden and fierce. "You must not." She froze. "That place is not meant for you," he continued, "and my people would not accept you there." Then his expression softened. "Elara Whitcomb," he said, his voice low and aching. "After I lost Saya, after I lost Iko, I believed my heart had gone silent forever." She swallowed hard. "You reminded me it still lives. That love can bloom even in the harshest desert." He paused. "But now you must let me go." "How?" she whispered. "How do I wake each day pretending you never existed?" His gaze held hers. Deep, steady, unbearably tender. "You live," he said. "You find joy when it appears, and you remember that what we shared was real, even if the world was not ready for it." "Time," the deputy announced, stepping forward. "Wait," Elara cried, pulling the wooden horse from her pocket. "I brought this for you. Please, take it with you." Zairn smiled faintly. "Keep it," he said softly. "I need no carving to remember you." He met her eyes fully. "You are written on my heart." Then he straightened, gathering himself. "Elara," he said quietly, "listen. Tonight, when the first star rises, I will make you a promise beneath its light. Every night after, when you see that star, know that I am looking at it too, repeating that same promise." "What promise?" she asked, as the door opened and more deputies entered. He smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his solemn face. "That love endures," he said, "that the borders men draw cannot imprison it. And that one day," he finished softly, "this world will change." The deputies moved in. Elara stepped back, clutching the wooden horse as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "I'll look for the star," she said through tears. "Every night." Zairn nodded once, then turned away, his back straight, his head unbowed. That evening, Elara stood alone on the ranch porch, the land silent around her. Thaddeus kept his distance, understanding there were wounds no father could soothe. The Dry Mesa hands avoided the house entirely, unsure how to face the woman who had defied everything they believed. As darkness settled, the first star pierced the deepening blue. Elara whispered Zairn's name. Miles away, she knew he would be gazing at that same light, speaking his promise into the night. Though she could not hear his words, she felt them settle inside her like a vow carried on the wind. A love brief, forbidden, and true. The wooden horse rested beside her on the railing, silent proof of something the world had tried and failed to erase. The carved grooves caught the fading glow of sunset. Elara traced them slowly with her fingertips, feeling the polished wood beneath her skin, remembering the unbreakable strength of Zairn's spirit, unyielding no matter how cruel the world had been to him. "I will remember," she whispered to the star trembling above the horizon, "and I will live in a way that honors what we found together." She did not know what the years ahead would bring, whether Zairn would ever find a way to send word. whether the world would truly change as he believed, whether fate might one day allow their paths to cross again. But beneath that same star that had witnessed his promise, Ilara made one of her own, to carry the truth of their love forward, to let it shape her choices and strengthen her resolve, to live worthy of the man who had shown her that the most beautiful things often take root in the most unlikely soil. And in that vow, she found a quiet measure of peace. 5 years passed after Zairn was sent to the San Carlos reservation. 5 years of Ilara lifting her gaze to the night sky, searching for the same star, repeating his promise in silence. 5 years of declining every suitor presented to her, much to Thaddeus Whitcomb's disappointment, until eventually he stopped trying altogether. The Arizona Territory changed during those years. The railroad pushed farther west, bringing new settlers and unfamiliar ideas. Thaddeus's ranch flourished, and his influence in territorial affairs grew. He became a voice for fairness and restraint, arguing that a man's worth should never be measured by the color of his skin or the name of his people, a transformation born from witnessing his daughter's unwavering devotion to principle. Ilara changed as well. She was no longer the sheltered young woman who had returned from Boston years before. She now managed much of the ranch's business, negotiating contracts, overseeing accounts, earning the respect of merchants and cattlemen alike. Yet beneath her composed exterior, the memory of Zairn remained vivid, untouched by time. On a warm September evening in 1883, Ilara sat on the porch reviewing the ranch ledgers as the sun slipped low behind the distant mountains. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, following the main road toward the house. Something in the silhouette made her breath catch. She set the papers aside and stood, shading her eyes against the gold-washed sky. The rider sat tall in the saddle, moving with a grace once as familiar to her as her own reflection. "It can't be," she whispered. Her hands gripped the porch railing, but as the rider drew closer, there was no denying it. Zairn. Older now, streaks of silver threading through his long, dark hair, his face leaner, etched with new lines carved by hardship and endurance. Yet his eyes, those deep, steady eyes, remained unchanged. Ilara descended the steps slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter the moment like morning mist. Zairn dismounted and stood beside his horse, watching her approach with equal measures of hope and uncertainty. "You came back," Ilara said when she finally stood before him, her voice barely a breath. "I promised beneath the stars," Zairn replied simply. Her composure broke. 5 years of restraint and longing dissolved as she rushed into his arms. He caught her instantly, holding her tight, his face buried in her hair, solid, real, alive. When they finally pulled apart, she kept hold of his hands, afraid to let go. "How is this possible?" she asked. "The court order is no longer valid." Thaddeus's voice came from behind them. Ilara turned to see her father standing on the porch, his expression layered with lingering worry and unmistakable joy. "Father?" she asked softly, confusion threading her voice. He stepped down toward them. "Perhaps we should continue this inside," he said gently. "There is much to explain." In the parlor, bathed in the amber glow of sunset, Thaddeus spoke carefully. "For the past 3 years, I've petitioned the territorial governor and worked through every legal channel available to overturn the restriction placed on Zairn." He looked at him with open respect. "It was finally approved last month. I sent word to San Carlos immediately." Ilara stared between them in disbelief. "You did all this without telling me?" "I couldn't bear to offer hope that might fail," Thaddeus admitted. "The process was uncertain, slow, political. I received your father's message 3 weeks ago, Zayrn said quietly. It took time to secure my release. Emotion surged in Alara's chest as she turned to her father. Why? She asked. After everything you once said about the impossibility of us? Thaddeus exhaled deeply, rubbing a hand through hair now heavily silvered. Because I was wrong, he said. Wrong to believe society's boundaries should dictate where love may exist. He looked at his daughter with quiet pride. And because in 5 years, despite every opportunity, your heart never wavered. That kind of devotion deserves honor, not resistance. Tears filled Alara's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Thaddeus turned to Zayrn. You should know. The ranch has changed. I made sure of it. Most of the old dry mesa hands are gone. The men here now were chosen for character, not prejudice. He straightened, his tone turning formal. And I've prepared legal documents, land grants in Alara's name, with protections for shared ownership, should the two of you choose to build a life together. The room fell quiet. Outside, the last light of day slipped beyond the mountains. And beneath a sky once divided by fear, 2 lives, long separated by injustice, stood once more on the same ground, finally facing a future that no longer required hiding. Zayrn's usually guarded expression softened, surprise flickering across his face. You would truly give your blessing? He asked quietly. I would bless my daughter's happiness, Thaddeus Whitcomb replied, and I've come to understand that her happiness lives beside you. He extended his hand. If that is still your wish. Zayrn clasped it without hesitation, his grip firm and steady. I have never wished for anything else. That night, beneath the same stretch of sky that had once witnessed their separation, Zayrn and Alara walked together along the creek where their first kiss had changed everything. Late summer blossoms scented the air, and moonlight shimmered across the slow-moving water. They stopped beneath a towering cottonwood, its branches whispering softly in the night breeze. When I was confined to the reservation, Zayrn said at last, there were days of hunger, sickness, and a darkness that pressed down on the spirit until breathing itself felt heavy. He turned toward her, gently taking her hands. But every night I searched for our star, and beneath it I repeated my promise, that love endures, and that someday I would find my way back to you. I heard you, Alara whispered. Across every mile I felt it. Your promise kept mine alive. Zayrn reached into the small leather pouch at his belt, the same one he had carried when he first rode onto her father's land years ago. From it, he drew out a ring that glimmered softly in the moonlight, silver set with a smooth turquoise stone. This belonged to my grandmother, Runa, he said. It is one of the few things I was allowed to keep when my people were forced away. He held it between them. Among my people, this gift does not mean possession. It means partnership. 2 spirits choosing to walk the same road through every season. Alara's breath caught as understanding bloomed in her chest. Alara Whitcomb, Zayrn said, emotion deepening his voice. Will you walk that road with me, not as the world demands we be, but as we know ourselves to be? 2 souls who found one another despite everything set against us. Yes, she answered instantly, warmth flooding through her. Today, and all the days that follow. Zayrn slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into an embrace beneath the watching stars, an unspoken vow sealed in silence. 2 months later, on a flawless autumn morning, a small gathering assembled behind the Whitcomb ranch house. A wooden arch stood beneath the open sky, woven with wildflowers and native grasses. Beneath it waited Zayrn, dressed in a formal Western suit. A single eagle feather rested in his hair, honoring the blood and history that shaped him. At his side stood Thaddeus Whitcomb himself, having insisted on serving as Zairn's best man. The gesture sent quiet ripples through the territory, a public declaration of unity no one could ignore. The dry mesa hands, carefully chosen for character rather than prejudice, formed a respectful semicircle, along with a handful of friends whose loyalty had been proven by action. Among them stood Alden Rowick, who had come to understand that justice sometimes required courage beyond the law books. When Elara appeared, escorted by Maeva Rowick, who had become a trusted friend after witnessing the depth of her devotion, a soft murmur passed through the gathering. She wore a simple white dress adorned with beadwork Zairn had taught her to stitch, threads of two worlds woven quietly into one. The ceremony blended traditions. A territorial official ensured the union was legally recognized, while Zairn spoke Apache blessings that honored the sacred bond of shared life. As vows were exchanged, Elara glanced at her father. Tears shone in his eyes, not with fear as before, but with pride. That evening, a celebration unlike any the territory had known unfolded beneath lantern light. Music rose from both cultures, laughter mingled freely, and for once, division gave way to something gentler. As night deepened, Zairn led Elara away from the gathering to where the sky opened wide. "There," he said softly, pointing upward. The first bright star pierced the darkness. "Our star." Elara leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "We don't need new promises tonight," she murmured. "We've already kept the ones that mattered." Zairn smiled and cupped her face gently. "One more," he said. "A promise to remember that what once seemed impossible became real because we refused to stop believing." "I promise," Elara whispered, rising to seal it with a kiss. When they returned, Thaddeus met them near the edge of the gathering, an envelope in his hand. "I have something for you both." Inside lay a deed, 200 acres along the eastern creek, including a small cabin he had quietly built over the past months. "Your home," he said. "Close enough for family, far enough for peace." His eyes twinkled faintly. "And room for grandchildren someday." Elara embraced him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for changing, for seeing beyond what you were taught." "Thank you," Thaddeus replied, voice thick with emotion, "for teaching me how." Later that night, standing on the porch of their new cabin, the distant sounds of celebration drifting through the dark, Elara and Zairn looked out over the land that would become their future, a place where their children would grow knowing both histories, where lines once drawn in fear no longer held power. "The Apache gave himself up to protect her name," Zairn murmured, repeating the words once whispered across the territory. "And left her with a promise beneath the stars," Elara finished, lacing her fingers with his. "A promise we kept." Above them, the night sky stretched endless and bright, no longer a witness to separation, but to a love that had endured every test and chosen to remain. The land stretched outward beneath the open sky, wide with promise, difficult, fragile, and yet undeniably theirs, just as their future now unfolded before them. In a world where grim headlines so often claim our attention, the story of the Apache who surrendered himself to protect a woman's name stands as a quiet reminder of something timeless. Goodness still lives among us, even when it does not make the news. Much like Elara's family, who once resisted, then slowly learned to accept, and ultimately welcomed Zairn as one of their own, there are people in every generation who choose love over fear and understanding over division. These moments rarely travel far beyond the places they occur, yet they happen every single day in towns and homes across the land. Thaddeus Whitcomb's journey, from a man bound tightly by expectation to one who defended his daughter's happiness above all else, shows us that hearts are not fixed things. They can change, they can grow. Even now, beyond the dust and distance of the frontier, people continue building quiet bridges across lines drawn by society. They recognize that shared humanity weighs heavier than difference. For every story of hatred that captures attention, there are countless untold acts of kindness. Families opening their doors, neighbors standing together, individuals choosing to truly see one another beyond appearances. If we train our eyes to look for that good, to notice compassion in small places, we begin to understand that love has never vanished. It simply moves softly. The world may not amplify these stories, but they are the true foundation of who we are. And perhaps the greatest lesson carried by Zairn and Ilara's journey is this: choose where your attention rests. Seek goodness when you find it. Create it when it is missing. And remember that even when the odds appear impossible, love has a stubborn way of carving its own path forward. So we invite you, dear listener, pause long enough to notice the good. The neighbor who offers a smile, the stranger who lends a hand, the soul brave enough to love beyond boundaries. Because love still lives, kindness still grows, and light still rises, even across the harshest deserts. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.